I caught her red-handed the HOA president in my late grandma's mountain cabin in a fluffy robe, Starbucks in hand like she owned the place. She opened the door and smiled like she'd been waiting for me, smug practiced. I stood in her doorway, boots full of snow, and she says, "You're trespassing." That's the hook. And yeah, I know how it sounds, but stick with me because it gets worse before it gets good. My name is Jake Riverside, and 3 months after Grandma Ethel died, I drove up the private one-lane road to the A-frame she built with her own 2 hands, planning to fix it up as a weekend retreat. Instead, I found Brenda Hutchcraft making herself at home, boyfriend's boots by the fire designer luggage and the living room cosmetics scattered across my grandmother's vanity. She was practically renting the place out and billing me HOA fees for the privilege. She blocked the door, all smirk and entitlement, and I realized I was looking at the perfect storm of greed and power. A little background. Grandma Ethel was the sort of woman who could outwork anyone and would laugh at your idea of rough. She'd raised 5 kids, survived harder things than a bad winter, and left me that cabin on 3 acres with creek access, a small fortune in those parts. My plan was simple: clean it up, keep it for weekends, maybe rent it now and then. Life had other plans. I was mid-divorce, running an electrical contracting business that had just been halved by paperwork and bad luck. I didn't need an HOA war. I got one anyway. Pine Ridge Community Association is 40 properties scattered on the mountain, mostly retirees who like feeding deer and complaining about the weather. HOA dues were reasonable, $150 a month for snow plowing and road maintenance. But Brenda, give the worst Karen you've ever met a real estate license and 8 years of unchallenged authority, and you get Brenda. She treated violations like performance art. Fines for mailboxes painted slightly off RVs, fined for parking in driveways. She even showed up with a ruler to measure a recovering neighbor's lawn while he was on oxygen. She had the perfume and the paperwork, and she used both like weapons. After Grandma's obituary hit the paper, Brenda zeroed in on me. First came a ridiculous inheritance transfer fee demand, a made-up charge. Then notices about deferred maintenance on a cabin that was winterized better than most houses in town. Certified mail piled up like legal grenades, liens, foreclosure threats, the whole intimidation toolkit. I told myself to ignore it. I was tired. That was my first mistake. Neighbors started whispering things I hadn't heard before. "Are you okay? Heard you're strapped for cash." Brenda was planting seeds, rumors about tax issues clouded title. Then the big move, an emergency caretaker assessment. 14 pages of legalese claiming the HOA had to step in to protect abandoned property, and a $350 monthly charge for caretaking. Translation: they were billing me for someone babysitting my cabin, someone who apparently had found dire structural problems that required immediate intervention. But I'd been there 2 weeks earlier, pipes, winterized shutters, latched, nothing amiss. Something didn't add up. So I drove up to check, and that's when I caught her living there. No pretense, no permission, just her in my grandmother's house. She didn't even try to hide it. Within 48 hours, she went full nuclear. Certified letters from some big-sounding law outfit accused me of harassment, ordered me to give 72-hour written notice before setting foot on the place, and threatened $1,000 per day fines for unauthorized entry. Then, using her husband Derrick's county connections, she conjured an emergency septic inspection notice claiming the cabin needed a $15,000 septic repair that would take months of permits. Problem: the cabin used a legal composting system dating to the 60s. There was no septic to fix. It was a bureaucratic conjuring, an attempt to paper me into bankruptcy. She had the audacity to set her phone recording when I arrived. She played the victim perfectly to neighbors who'd come running when alarms shrieked. Tears trembling, a practice performance that made everyone forget who was actually squatting in the house. And while she staged drama, I sat and scrolled through my grandmother's obsessive paperwork. That's when I found it, the original 1962 easement agreement tucked away in a fireproof filing box. It was a masterpiece. Grandma hadn't just bought land, she'd negotiated exclusive perpetual control over the private road that led to the cabin. In plain terms, I didn't just own the cabin, I controlled who could use the only way in and out. Easement holders could restrict access for safety and maintenance. There was a clause, the nuclear option, that allowed immediate revocation of access upon criminal activity or fraud by property users. When I read that line, something cold and electric ran through me. Brenda hadn't thought about the road. I didn't storm in waving the deed. I played dumb. I apologized to neighbors for the noise, acted like a defeated owner, drove off like a trespasser. Let her think she'd won. I needed time to build a case to document, to gather proof. She'd made more mistakes than she knew. She'd been embezzling HOA funds, inflating invoices for contractors tied to her family billing for phantom snow removal and trail maintenance. I subpoenaed records, hired a forensic accountant, and what he turned up made my coffee taste like battery acid. Tens of thousands siphoned off fake invoices, shell contracts, money routed through relatives' companies. And then I found the receipts for the estate sale, grandma's quilts, photos, furniture gone, sold for pocket change, 60 years of family history trafficked like cheap junk. That made it personal in a way the other stuff didn't. This was theft of memory. Asked where Brenda lived, she confidently asked where Brenda lived. She confidently said my cabin's address. That was the crack that split her story. She had asked for protection from me on property she claimed she was living in. The judge dismissed the order and told her to vacate. She leaned in the courtroom and hissed, "This isn't over." Famous last words. That's when things escalated fast. The accountant's numbers came in over $100,000 missing. The insurance investigator confirmed staged vandalism and false damage claims. Derrick, the husband, called me terrified and started whispering confessions he'd been falsifying documents with her, but the weight of felony charges finally shook him. He told me Brenda was planning to flee, had a cash buyer lined up, intended to forge documents and sell my family's cabin to someone from out of state. She'd literally been burying evidence in my backyard cache and the HOA checkbook and speaking to buyers on the phone while she thought no one was listening. This was no longer petty HOA corruption. It was fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. It was federal. I started quietly collecting proof trail camera footage of rental guests, audio of her touting cash deals, footage of her burying a metal box behind the old fire pit. I recorded phone calls where she offered to pay me $50,000 in cash to look the other way. I recorded her saying she'd set the house on fire if the investigation closed in. I recorded enough to make an investigator's jaw drop. Here's the twist I didn't see coming: the easement. That ancient 1962 agreement gave me a legitimate legal way to act. The culvert under the road was failing. Real repairs were needed. I scheduled a proper box culvert replacement permits, heavy equipment concrete sections that would make the road impassable for days. I handed out 72-hour notices to neighbors, truthful, necessary, legitimate. Timing matters. Snow was forecast. The repairs would make the mountain road impassable just as Brenda planned to vanish. I coordinated with a real excavation crew. I told the truth about the need for repair. Colonel Patterson, our retired neighbor, read the paperwork and said, "Do it." I told every neighbor what was happening. Nobody objected. Murphy, the excavator operator, grinned and said it was about time someone fixed that culvert. Within days, heavy equipment arrived. Concrete sections blocked the last exit. It was the perfect legal trap. If Brenda tried to drive out, she'd find a trench and a crane. If she walked out, she'd face freezing, snowy miles. If she stayed, law enforcement could find her. Decided to move in. We coordinated the timing so the agents would arrive while construction kept the road impassable. Snow fell. The mountain got quiet and white. The trap closed. Watching the arrest was a moment I'll never forget. Brenda screaming about being framed, thrashing in designer boots on a snowy trail while federal agents read her rights. She acted like she was the martyr. She even told a TV reporter that every fee she'd levied was for the greater good. The irony was so thick you could taste it. She confessed to everything on camera while justifying it. Poetic in a way. Court followed. Guilty pleas, federal sentencing, restitutions. Derrick got a lighter sentence for cooperating. Brenda got prison. The community recovered more than money. It recovered its dignity. We reformed the HOA with term limits, independent audits, transparency reports, and a real management company. Property values rose. Mrs. Lucy, the neighbor who'd cried at my truck the night I told her what I'd found, became the new HOA president and ran a tight, honest ship. For me, healing was small things. Returning Grandma's quilts to the fireplace corner, putting a photo of her in the place she always sat, fixing the leaky roof she'd patched herself for decades. We started a small scholarship in her name to teach community governance and fight corruption. Because what good is justice if it doesn't help the next person? So what's the lesson? Power corrodes when it's unchecked. Paperwork, rules, and good intentions can be weaponized. Know your rights, especially about easements and HOA finances. Pay attention to invoices, ask questions, and don't let someone with the smell of expensive perfume and a stack of legal paper bully a whole neighborhood. And never ever underestimate the value of a shoebox with decades of paperwork in it. Justice felt sweet the morning Brenda left in federal custody, and there's a certain satisfaction in watching someone who preyed on neighbors get led down the trail in cuffs. But satisfaction isn't the point. The point is that communities can fix themselves when people refuse to accept abuse, when someone notices documents and quietly acts within the law. Now I'll ask you, what would you do if someone took over a place your family loved? Where would you draw the line between letting it go and fighting like hell? Drop your worst HOA horror story below. Tell me where you're watching from and if you've ever had to dig through old papers to find the one piece of justice hiding in a drawer. Because if one thing's true, it's this: the quiet ones, the people who read the fine print, sometimes they're the only ones standing between a crooked leader and a whole bunch of ruined lives.